Ex-big tech employee Frances Haugen has recently testified against Facebook and their moderation practices. So what, you might ask? Facebook had it coming, you might say. Well, the problem is everything about her cherry-picked leaks and so-called insight, when examined, appears to be pushing for the exact opposite narrative you might expect. She is arguing for increased censorship and increased government involvement of social media. In this short video, I will explain why everything about this reeks of totalitarian propaganda, touching on just about all aspects of the propaganda playbook. I'll preface this by pointing out why big tech censorship is something that no reasonable person should be a fan of. Every single social media giant engages in a lobbying and revolving door relationship with the government, with multiple members of Congress financially invested in them and serving as advisors, creating a sort of gray area between business and Washington. Since we are on the topic of Facebook, this was their stats in recent years. Roughly $8 million spent on campaign contributions, $20 million spent on lobbying, 80% of contributions went to the Democratic Party, and on the flip side, the 6 major politicians you see here all have over $100K invested in Facebook, with Nancy Pelosi having a very nice potential 7-figure investment. So I'm sure when it comes to what Facebook decides to censor, there is definitely no conflict of interest here. Nope, not at all. This makes the question of whether or not a private company should be allowed to censor speech on their own platform somewhat of a poisoned discussion, meaning you can't really have said discussion without addressing the elephant in the room, which is the bigger question of whether or not it's still truly a private company doing the censorship if the relationship between that company and the government is this cozy. Or is it really just the government censoring as they say fit, using a private company by proxy? I would strongly argue that it's the latter. The idea that it's okay just because the censorship is obfuscated behind backroom lobbying deals that make it appear as if it's just an innocent company doing as they wish is, in my opinion, completely absurd, and anyone who would argue otherwise is either severely misinformed or is someone who doesn't truly believe in free speech. Any solution to this problem of big tech censorship that does not take this elephant into account and recognize that there is already way too much corruption and way too much government involvement is severely missing the point. Well, let's get back to Frances Haugen. From her 60-minute interview and testimony, does she touch on any of the problems of corruption I just mentioned in any significant or insightful way? No. Does she reveal anything of interest about any backroom deals? No. In fact, all she has really done here is cherry-picked documents to fit her narrative that the free expression on Facebook results in dangerous outcomes. So let's take a look at some of the things she said while keeping in mind the tools of propaganda as written on historians.org, the American Historical Association, as a simple objective measurement to better understand the complete and utter nonsense that is being forced down our throat here.
The complaints say Facebook's own research shows that it amplifies hate, misinformation, and political unrest. She says evidence shows that the company is lying to the public about making significant progress against hate, violence, and misinformation. One study she found from this year says, "We estimate that we may action as little as 3 to 5% of hate and about 0.6% of violence and incitement on Facebook. We have evidence from a variety of sources that hate speech, divisive political speech, and misinformation on Facebook and the family of apps are affecting societies around the world."
And I had seen how high the stakes were in terms of making sure there was high quality information on Facebook.
The first propaganda tool is suggestion or stimulation. The concept here is to trick people into accepting a proposition on illogical grounds. Rhetoric is used to sidestep critical thinking using subjective, broad, direct statements. Did you notice how just about everything she said was completely subjective rhetoric? Who decides what is misinformation? Who decides what is divisive political speech? What is polarizing content? What is high-quality information? Of course, what these actually mean is whatever the propagandist wants you to think. The misinformation is whatever information they do not want you to believe. The divisive political speech is whatever political ideologies they do not agree with. The polarizing content is whatever challenges their position. And high-quality information is whatever information that they want you to see. But of course, a propagandist isn't going to tell you that, because when you understand the trick, it becomes less magical. Hate and violence are also very familiar terms, so it's very easy to use them subjectively like this to suggest that you must accept the idea that we need more censorship, or else of course you are being a hateful and violent person. You must therefore accept this suggestion that they're making that free expression on Facebook is dangerous and therefore must be regulated by the government for our own good. The rational alternative viewpoint, which is that Facebook is simply a tool, a speech platform, and people should choose for themselves how to use it, is not explored. And take a closer look now at the information given. Notice how these are all also just subjective concepts that can legitimately mean millions of different things, of which they again fail to specify. But you are being expected to swallow this nonsense like it means something verifiable, even though it doesn't. Nowhere during the 60-minute interview did I see this being challenged in any meaningful way. Rather, there is an ongoing theme throughout the interview that the opinions they are espousing here are somehow gospel truth, to be accepted without question. All of this to distract you from taking the more logical stance, which is the proposition that some authoritarian structure should be in place to do the thinking for us is completely absurd.
But I'm here today because I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy, deepen divides, destabilize democracies, and make young girls and women feel bad about their bodies. It erodes our faith in each other. It erodes our ability to want to care for each other. The version of Facebook that exists today is tearing our societies apart and causing ethnic violence around the world.
Ethnic violence, including Myanmar in 2018.
I don't trust that they're willing to actually invest what needs to be invested to keep Facebook from being dangerous.
Next up in our propaganda tool bag is the indirect statements, the insinuations, the loose implications, things in the background to set the mood. Notice the appeals to emotion here. Won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody please think of the ethnic diversity? The big bad free speech man has a 0.001% chance of saying something bad for children, so anyone supports free speech must not be thinking of the children. You don't hate children now, do you? You don't want certain marginalized groups to feel unsafe now, do you? So of course the implication here is, again, we need government regulation for online discourse, and anyone who disagrees is somehow a child-abusing turbo bigot. The psychological and emotional manipulation that is taking place here is both obvious and ridiculous. There's also the general tone of the 60 Minutes interview, somber and serious. It's there to give you this appearance that this is all somehow completely factual, not to be questioned again. To distract you from the reality that nearly all of the complaints in this pseudo-whistleblow are completely subjective terms that can mean anything. Oh no, there's dangerous stuff on the interwebs. Be very afraid. The worst example of what's on Facebook are of course brought out in order to imply that if you don't agree with this censorship idea plan, then you support these atrocities. It's a nice black and white fallacy, made extra effective by the fact that it is the only being loosely implied, rather than just flat out stated, in order to give the propagandists some plausible deniability.
Misinformation, angry content is enticing to people and keeps them on the platform.
Yes. Facebook has realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they'll click on less ads, they'll make less money. Or they change the settings back to what they were before to prioritize growth over safety. I believe in the potential of Facebook. We can have social media we enjoy that connects us. Congressional action is needed. They won't solve this crisis without your help.
The third tool of propaganda is to appeal to the known desires of the audience. The way this propaganda technique works is it takes advantage of the fact that people will often support bad ideas if those bad ideas appeal to some form of need. In this case, it's people's need to feel safe and secure online, and the fact that people want to have higher quality content on social media, because let's be honest, there's a lot of garbage on Facebook. The fact that Facebook is not as high quality as it could be is well known, and that's one of the reasons this kind of manipulation works so well. There is in fact a glimmer of truth in what Haugen is saying. It's true that there is a lot of crap on Facebook. It's true that people who are not careful and rational in choosing what to believe will stumble upon something that isn't true and blindly believe it. And so the desire for a better, safer social media experience is the ultimate draw here. But that's where the lies start, the implication that government regulation could somehow fix this problem and do a better job, despite a complete lack of evidence that they would. All of these propaganda techniques are being done to distract you from the obvious truth. The way the Facebook algorithm works is it really just gives you more of the content that you have already interacted with. That's it. It's not trying to give you bad content, it's just trying to provide you with more of what you've already liked. If people like crazy stuff, guess what? That's their choice. They are grown adults and free human beings, and they're free to do that. So what Haugen is really claiming by saying we need this regulation is really just that she thinks that you are too stupid and too mentally weak to decide for yourself what content you want to see on social media. Of course, she can't say this outright because then her arrogant little jig would be up, so instead she obfuscates it through various appeals to our fears and propaganda techniques in hopes that no one notices the fallacies that are being made here. But really, this is what she likely means to say. You can't be trusted to think for yourself. You need more experts like her to tell you what content you should be enjoying. You need Congress to act. You need the government to step in and do the thinking for you. We all need government to regulate our speech and our content online for us because we are all just too dumb. Yeah, pure authoritarian nonsense. I have to say, this is almost as suspicious as Epstein allegedly killing himself. There are people out there elsewhere on the internet claiming all sorts of things, that this is all being staged by government officials looking to create an excuse to kill online free speech, that this whole thing is just one big psyop, that she's CIA glowing, blah blah blah. Now, whether or not any of these conspiracies are true, I couldn't find any verifiable proof of it, so I can't say anything definitive on those subjects. But I wouldn't be horribly surprised if something deeper is going on behind the scenes here. My own suspicion is that the establishment media is simply amplifying her case because more restrictions on social media would benefit them due to the fact that it would mean less competition for their audience, as the internet has been eroding the relevancy of mainstream cable news for a while now, and of course they don't like that. Yet what I can say for sure in conclusion is that the Frances Haugen Facebook quote whistleblower unquote leak is definitely pulling all the oldest propaganda tricks in the book. The standard psychological and emotional manipulation is all there and blatantly being used in order to appeal to people's fears and convince us to accept more government regulation, more authority figures telling us what we are allowed to think or say, all of course supposedly for our own good. When of course it would not be for our benefit. It would not magically make the world a better place, and history has shown in the past that government regulation over speech and censorship generally ends with making things worse. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, and all that annoying algorithmy stuff.